The moment my brother's girlfriend opened her mouth at my graduation dinner, I knew she had been waiting a long time to do this. She smiled at the dean of my department, Dr. Tare. Patricia Holloway, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the woman who had championed my research for 3 years, and said it with the warmth of someone offering a compliment. You know, she almost didn't finish. We kept telling her she wasn't cut out for research, didn't we, Mom? My mother nodded. My father looked at his wine glass. Dr. Holloway looked at me. I said nothing. I just picked up my fork. That moment lives in me still. Not because it broke me, but because it was the one that finally made everything click into place. All the years of quiet, of swallowing, of telling myself it wasn't that bad, they folded into that single sentence like a letter being sealed, and I thought, I have everything I need. I've had it for months. I was just waiting for the right room. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I have a PhD in molecular biology and a job offer from a research institute in Boston that I accepted 6 weeks before that dinner. I grew up in a house where my brother Marcus was the sun, and I was whatever the sun doesn't bother to illuminate. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I used to. For a long time, I carried it like a stone in my chest. That particular ache of being raised in the same house by the same 2 people and somehow being the one who needed to earn what the other one received for free. Marcus got the car at 16. I got a lecture about responsibility and a bus pass. Marcus dropped out of his first college, and my parents paid for a second one, a better one, without a word of frustration. When I won a state science award at 17, my mother asked if I could have done it without the teacher who mentored me. I'm not telling you this to build a case against my family. I'm telling you so you understand what 28 years of a particular dynamic does to a person's nervous system. You learn to be quiet. You learn to document. You learn that the room is never on your side, so you make sure the facts are. I was 23 when I started my PhD program at the university. Marcus, 3 years older, had finally settled into a career in sales. He was good at it. Charming in the easy, surface way that plays well in short conversations. He met a woman named Danny at a work conference 2 years into my program. Danny was beautiful in the way that made rooms rearrange themselves. She had the kind of confidence that doesn't ask permission, and within 4 months of meeting my brother, she had moved into his apartment and rearranged his entire social world. I watched it happen from a distance. I had my lab, I had my research. I was in the most demanding years of a doctoral program, running on 4 hours of sleep and instant coffee, and I didn't have the bandwidth to feel threatened by a woman I barely knew. That was my first mistake. Not that I should have fought her, I couldn't have, but I should have paid attention sooner. The first thing I noticed was how she talked about my work at family dinners. Not cruelly, not at first, just with this practiced skepticism, the kind that sounds like concern. Is there actually a future in academic research? I read that it's almost impossible to get a permanent position. Or, POG programs have such high dropout rates. It must be so stressful. Are you holding up okay? She said these things with her hand on Marcus's arm and her eyes on my parents, and my parents would nod along with the gravity of people receiving new and important information. They didn't know she was wrong. They didn't know the field. They only knew that Danny seemed to know things, and I was always either exhausted or absent, which in a family like mine reads as losing. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I started keeping notes. Not obsessively. I wasn't building a war room. I just started writing things down in a document on my laptop. Dates, exact words. Who was present. I did it the same way I kept lab notes, as a matter of record, because I had learned very early that in a room where the story can be rewritten, the person with documentation survives. The second thing I noticed was when I came home for Thanksgiving during my 3rd year and found that Danny had gone through my old room. I had left boxes of my undergrad research notes there, organized by year, because my apartment near campus had no storage. When I went to check on them, 2 boxes were missing. When I asked my mother, she said Danny had been reorganizing and might have moved some things to the garage. When I found the boxes in the garage, they had been opened. Several folders were missing entirely. I asked Danny about it, carefully, privately. She looked at me with genuine seeming confusion and said she hadn't touched anything. Maybe the boxes had just shifted. She said it with such smooth certainty that for a moment I questioned my own memory. I didn't question it for long. My old research notes from undergrad were not cutting-edge science. They were the early work of a student finding her footing, documentation of experimental methods, early literature reviews, the kind of foundational scaffolding that teaches you how to think before you know what to think about. But they were mine, and one of those folders contained the original draft of a methodology I had developed with my undergraduate advisor that formed the basis of my doctoral thesis direction. I went home that night and I started being more careful. I moved my current research files to an encrypted drive. I set up a separate email account where I forwarded my own work to myself, time-stamped. I began keeping a second copy of every document at my campus office. I did not tell anyone I was doing this. I simply did it, and I waited. The invitation for my graduation dinner came from my parents, which should have told me something. I had defended my dissertation in March, and the formal ceremony was in May, but my parents wanted to do a family dinner in April. Just us, they said, and Dr. Fath Holloway, who had been my advisor for 4 years and had become, in the way of certain mentors, something closer to a second parent. My parents had met her once before and liked her, which I think was partly why they wanted her there. A witness to the occasion, proof of my achievement made visible. I should have known Danny would find a way to make that room hers too. The restaurant was quiet, upscale, the kind of place with white tablecloths and small candles that my mother chose because she wanted to feel like the occasion was important. We were 6 around the table, my parents, Marcus, Danny, Dr. Holloway, and me. The food was good. The first hour was fine. I watched Danny watching Dr. Holloway all evening, assessing. I recognized the calculation behind her eyes because I'd been watching it for 2 years. She was deciding how to play the room, and she decided just after the entrees arrived. She turned to Dr. Holloway with that smile, the warm, concerned one, and she said it. The thing about me almost not finishing. The thing about not being cut out for research. Didn't we, Mom? My mother, who had never in my adult life told me I wasn't cut out for anything, said, the way people do when they don't want conflict and convince themselves that's different from agreeing. Dr. Holloway's eyes came to mine. I picked up my fork. I said, actually, Dr. Holloway, I was going to wait until dessert, but since we're talking about my research, would you mind telling my family a little about the paper? Doctor said. Holloway, who is one of the sharper people I have ever known, understood immediately that something was happening in that room that had nothing to do with science. She set down her own fork with great deliberateness and said, I'd be glad to. She talked for about 4 minutes. She talked about the methodology I had developed, the originality of the contribution, the fact that it had been accepted for publication in a journal that my father had to Google under the table to understand the significance of. She talked about the fellowship offer I had received in the Boston position. She talked about me with the specific warmth of someone who has watched a person do difficult work over a long period of time and found him worthy of respect. My parents listened with the expression of people hearing a translation they hadn't known they needed. Marcus looked uncomfortable in the way he always does, when the story of our family doesn't center him. Danny looked at me. I looked back. The interesting thing, I said very quietly to no one in particular, is that I almost lost access to some of the early foundational work. Some files went missing from my home storage about 2 years ago. I paused. I'm glad I had backups. The table went very still. What files? My mother said. Research notes from undergrad, including early drafts of the core methodology Dr. Holloway just described. I kept my voice completely level. Some folders disappeared from the boxes I stored in my old room. I documented it at the time. I have the dates. I did not look at Danny. I didn't need to. I was speaking to my parents. I'm not making an accusation, I said. I'm just saying that the work existed. I protected it. It survived, and it formed the foundation of a PhD dissertation that was rated outstanding by an external committee. So when someone says I almost didn't finish or wasn't cut out for this, I let the sentence breathe for a moment. The record says otherwise. My mother's face did something complicated. My father put down his wine glass. Danny said brightly, "I think there might be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Dr. Holloway said. Her voice was pleasant and completely final. "I've supervised Claire's work for 4 years. I know exactly what she built and where it came from." The rest of dinner was quiet. What happened afterward happened slowly, and then all at once, the way these things do. On the drive home, my mother called me. She asked, carefully, what exactly I'd meant about the files. I told her. I told her what I had found when I came home for Thanksgiving, what had been missing, what Danny had said when I asked her about it. I told her I had written it down at the time, the date, the exact conversation, the specific folders that were gone. I told her calmly, without drama, as though I were presenting findings. There was a long silence. "Why didn't you tell us then?" she said. "I did," I said. "You told me the boxes had probably just shifted." Another silence. Longer. "Mom," I said, "I'm not calling to relitigate anything. I'm calling because you asked. But I need you to know that I've been documenting things for 2 years, and not because I wanted to use it, because I needed to know that I wasn't losing my mind." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You weren't." That was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I received that night. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even close to everything. But it was the first time in my life my mother said something that put the weight of a situation where it actually belonged. And I drove home with the window down and the cold April air coming in, and I let myself feel, very quietly, that it mattered. My father called 2 days later. He asked more questions, practical ones. The kind he asks when he's trying to map something, who had access to the room, what the folders contained, whether I had the documentation somewhere he could see. I sent him the log I'd kept, dates, incidents, the November conversation, Danny's response. He read it, and he called again, and he said, "I owe you an apology, for a long time, not just about this." I sat with that for a while. I said, "I know." He said, "I don't know if that's enough." I said, "It's a start. I want to tell you what happened with Marcus and Danny, because I know that's what you're waiting for, and I want to be honest about how unsatisfying and how sufficient the truth actually is. They didn't break up immediately. That would make a better story. But it wouldn't be true. What happened was that the dinner cracked something open that had been sealed for 2 years, and the crack let in air, and things that need air to survive began to surface. My parents started asking different questions. My mother, who had taken Danny's assessments of my work largely at face value, began paying closer attention to the things Danny said about other people. A pattern, once you look for it, is hard to unsee. My father had a direct conversation with Marcus about the files. Marcus, and this surprised me, a little, did not defend Danny unconditionally. He was uncomfortable in the way of someone who has suspected something and been relieved not to have to know it, and suddenly is required to know. He called me 6 weeks later. It was a short call. He said, "I think she took them. I don't know what she was going to do with them, but I think she took them." He paused. "I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm not going to tell you we're close now. We're not. We're 2 people who share a history and a last name and are figuring out slowly what that means without the roles we were assigned playing out on autopilot. It's uncomfortable and real, and it's more than I had before. Danny is no longer in the picture. I don't know the full story of how that ended, and I don't need to. What I know is that the last time I spoke to Marcus, he was alone and he sounded like himself, or a version of himself that he might grow into if he lets himself. As for the files, I still have everything. The encrypted drive, the timestamped emails, the log. I keep them not as weapons, there's nothing left to defend against, but because they remind me of something. They remind me that I knew when no one in that house was going to know for me. I documented my own reality in a space where reality was negotiable. And because I did, when the moment came, I didn't have to raise my voice. The record spoke. I just sat there and let it. Dr. Holloway took me to coffee the week after graduation. It was a Tuesday, gray and damp. One of those mornings where the city looks like it's still deciding whether to commit to spring. We sat across from each other at a small table near the window, and she ordered her usual black coffee, nothing else, and she looked at me for a moment before she said anything. "That was a difficult room," she said. "Yes," I said. "You handled it well." I wrapped my hands around my cup. Outside, a woman walked past with an umbrella she didn't need yet. "I had a lot of time to prepare," I said. Dr. Holloway nodded. "She has this quality, a quality I have tried to learn from her and only partially succeeded at, of letting silence do work without filling it." We sat quietly for a moment. "The fellowship starts in September?" she said. "August 31st. Boston will suit you?" I smiled into my coffee. "I think so. The thing about leaving is that it sounds, in the telling, like a triumph. And maybe it is, but it also just feels like opening a door and walking through it into a space that is yours in the way that spaces can be. Not because anyone gave it to you, but because you built the capacity to occupy it, quietly, over years, without anyone watching. I used to want someone to watch. I used to want my parents in the front row of my life, tracking what I was building, matching their understanding of me to who I actually was. I think I let go of that want somewhere in the second year of my program, around 3 in the morning in a lab that smelled like reagent and burnt coffee, when I realized that the work was good regardless of whether anyone in my family understood it, that the methodology was sound whether or not my mother remembered asking if I could have done it without my teacher, that the dissertation would stand whether or not Danny had found a way to undermine it. The work existed. I had made it exist, and no one could take that back. I'm in Boston now. My apartment is small and has a radiator that makes a sound like a very elderly man sighing, and I love it completely. I can see a sliver of the harbor from my kitchen window if I stand at the right angle, which I do every morning while I wait for coffee to brew. I talk to my parents more than I used to. Different conversations than before, more careful on both sides, more honest in the way that careful honesty can be, when the people involved are trying. My mother sent me a card when I started the fellowship. It said, "We're proud of you." No qualifications. No, "I'm sure your mentor helped." Just that, in her handwriting, on a card with a lighthouse on the front. I put it on my refrigerator. I'm not telling you this because the ending is clean. It isn't. There are still dinners that are complicated and phone calls that require more patience than I always have, and a brother I'm learning to know from the beginning, without the script you were both handed. There's still a version of me that sometimes, in a quiet moment, feels the old ache, the one that asks why it had to take so long for the room to see what the record had been saying all along. But then I sit down at my desk in the morning in the city I chose, in the work I built, and the ache recedes. It doesn't disappear. I don't think it's supposed to. I think it's just part of what made me someone who documents, who protects, who waits for the right room. And when I got that room, when I finally sat across a white tablecloth from the people who had shaped and misread me for 30 years, with the dean of my department beside me, and years of careful record behind me, I didn't yell. I didn't perform. I just spoke plainly, and let the truth do what the truth does when you've had the patience to keep it safe. It doesn't always win the room. But that night, in that restaurant with the candles burning low and my father setting down his wine glass and my mother going quiet in a new way, it did. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was, actually, everything. There's a version of the story where I walk away from that dinner table feeling vindicated, clean, and certain. I want to be honest with you, it wasn't quite that simple. Vindication, when it actually comes, is quieter than you imagine it will be. It doesn't arrive with music. It arrives the way the truth usually does, in a room that goes still and stays still, and lets the silence do the work you were never allowed to do out loud. What I've come to understand is that what happened to me, and what happened to the people who underestimated me, wasn't luck, and it wasn't cruelty on my part. It was the direct result of choices made over years by everyone in that room. My brother's girlfriend chose to chip away at something she didn't build and couldn't understand. My parents chose to fill the silence with agreement rather than questions. And I chose, every single time, in every quiet moment no one witnessed, to protect what was mine, document what was real, and keep working. Those choices compounded. That's how it always works. Not in dramatic bursts, but in the slow accumulation of what you do when no one is watching. I kept my records, not because I knew there would be a graduation dinner. I kept them because I knew that the only person responsible for preserving my reality was me. That knowledge, once you accept it fully, stops being sad and starts being clarifying. It tells you exactly where to put your energy. Integrity is not a passive quality. It's a daily practice that most people will never see you doing. It means building your work carefully, protecting it honestly, and refusing to let someone else's version of you replace the one you know to be true. That's not stubbornness. That's the most important form of intelligence there is, the kind that keeps its head down, keeps its record straight, and waits. I think about the people who shaped me without meaning to, who taught me, by never quite seeing me, how to see myself with extraordinary clarity. I don't carry bitterness toward them. What I carry is the understanding that a person who is forced to become their own witness develops a particular kind of strength. You stop needing the room to confirm what you already know. You stop performing for an audience that isn't paying attention. You just do the work, and you let the work speak when the moment finally comes. Claire sat at that table with years of evidence, a dean beside her, and the patience of someone who had never stopped believing the record would matter. And it did. Not because the universe arranged it that way, but because she arranged it that way, one quiet decision at a time. That's the only kind of justice I trust. The kind you build yourself with your hands, in the dark, long before anyone is watching. If you're in the middle of your own version of that quiet time right now, unseen, underestimated, swallowing more than you should have to, I want you to hear this. Keep building, keep documenting, keep your work somewhere safe. The room will come. Make sure you're ready for it.